Welcome to Facts and Politics. I'm your host, Sarah Skitchkowski. We talk about the news and things going on in the world. I'm here with Peter Hostrauser, co-founder of Hall Pass Education, with Audrey Boyle, Dr. Peter A. James. Peter Hostrauser is also the creator of Disrupt Education, a teacher at Stagg High School, and a business coach. Tell us more about yourself.
Oh yeah, you got it pretty well there. My value is just helping others find and show their value. That's who I am to a T. As you spoke of a lot of the different areas that I'm in, I do a lot of work around education, business coaching, mentoring, speaking, and my true passion in life is just attaching people's purpose and helping them find their value and then just growing it.
What led you to want to become an educator?
That's a great question. I come from a family of educators. So my father is an educator. He was a math teacher for, 30 some years. My brother's an athletic director and was a business teacher as well. The real story, I'm going to give you the shortest piece of this, was that I had a chance to work with elementary school kids about 21, 22 years ago. And we were doing video announcements. So I was working with 3rd through 5th graders doing video announcements at an elementary school right around South Bend, Indiana. And it was interesting because the technology we're sitting in here at this awesome studio was not available. We were doing VHS tapes and doing some videos and things like that. So some of the teachers gave me really good kids, meaning I don't want to say any kid's good or bad, but they were really good at school. And then some of the kids were just struggling with school. They just didn't like it, We had a team going, and what happened was the kids started learning math and English because they had the right script. They had to actually do an old reel-to-reel math and different things like that. So when they went back to their teachers after a few weeks of this, they were starting to excel because they were attaching what they learned hands-on to the academia that was being given to them, their writing and all these things that now had a little bit more purpose. From that point on, I knew I wanted to be an educator. So that's the short story, but that was the switch that said I really wanted to get into school and teach people how to be creative and learn at the same time.
And getting to Disrupt Education, I know a little bit about it, but why did you want to actually disrupt education?
Right. I don't mean it in a negative connotation. It does, it seems, and we're definitely being disrupted right now in the middle of the pandemic. So I think when people get uncomfortable and they're shaken up a little bit, good things come out of it, right? If you have the right structure around you. So in education, I've been an educator for 20 years in a high school system, several high school systems, by the way. And when I was at Oak Park and River Forest High School, I had the privilege of actually learning from my students. For some reason, something clicked there, and I've always learned from my students, but there was such a diversity of students and so many different angles coming in on what people wanted to learn. What I started to do is try to take and collect their stories. And that's what Disrupt Education became. It became kind of a club to begin with, where a lot of students would come into the classroom after school. I didn't get paid a stipend or anything, but it was fun because we started building on their dreams and the passions that they want to do. And that's basically how Disrupt Education was born. And it's evolved. It's evolved into some business coaching, some mentoring that I do. And then it's a podcast as well. So I take the stories of any kind of educator or educated students, teachers, parents, entities, and we tell stories about, how they would change education. And man, I've learned so much. I've been able to interview people all over the world. It's great. It's just a great thing now because I'm learning as much as, I'm providing people with value. So it's a win-win for me.
Nice. What are some problems with the education system in America that you see as a teacher?
Well, I think we've looked at a one-size-fits-all a little bit too long. And I'm going to speak on the secondary level. Primary is not my area. I'm thinking 9, maybe even 6th through 12th grade. I think the repetitiveness of it is a challenge. We still do bells. It's something that I never really did well at. I mean, I knew how to play the game, but I still feel like we're looking at an assembly line, and we got away from the humanistic approach to education somewhat when numbers and scores and these things, test scores and GPAs came into play, and it became a competition to rank people, and that had its time, I guess, sometime. But in my 20 years, I've seen a lot of students just start to detach from education. School should be a place where you could come and learn more about your community and have an opportunity to change your community for the better, to interact with real life, specifically high schools. And right now, I think we're getting a little chance to see that in the pandemic. But I think we have a lot more to learn about different schools across the world and different ways that students learn and what are they good at. We need to start building on their value rather than, all right, you missed this, so we're going to give you more of this. So I think those are overlying pieces. I mean, we could go on for hours in the podcast talking about, small different things that are challenging in school systems.
So as a teacher, what have you tried to do to switch up something that could be seen as boring or something that students wouldn't like? And what are the limitations that you're restricted to?
Right. The number one wall I come up against is time, right? So you only have so much time. Some of the things that I've done in the classroom is really you try to, as much as possible when you have 25, 30 students in a classroom or online in these days, is you have to try to dig into who they are and really, number one, create a safe place, a safe environment for people to be able to share. I'll give you a story today that happened with my internship course. Is we have a brown bag speech. So if you don't know what a brown bag speech is, it's where people bring 4 to 5 things in a bag and then they pull them out and they talk about that, right? And so we went through 5 or 6 of those speeches today, and some kids were tearing up. Like they were really, they felt safe saying, things about their family, and, they had some memories about a family member who's no longer, or one of the students was like, I have an opportunity. She's got a job, she's making money, she's being very responsible, and she feels like her parents have provided her more. So doing these things and going deep into what a student and who they are first, and then adding curriculum, that's how I roll. That's what I do. So even I teach a personal finance class. I go into what does the kid want to do? How do you want to earn money? And let's talk about that. And some students have no idea. They're like, I don't even know what I want to do. So we dig into that, and then we start talking about how do you relate to money? How do you relate to business management or whatever I'm teaching? So those are the methods that I do this. It's very hard because some districts have a very set curriculum. I'm lucky enough right now, and at Oak Park, I did not have a very rigid, we knew what we had to do.
Oh, so
yeah.
At OPRF, you don't have, it's more lax?
It was. I don't know what it is. I haven't been there in 3 years, but yeah, so it was they let their teachers be professional, at least in the business department in the electives. So we were able to create our own assessments, if you will, and they didn't have to be bubble-in tests. And I rarely use bubble-in tests. I just don't like that. I want students to actually show what they can do. But that's an uncomfortable place for some students. If you're not building those relationships, it is something that you have to build, and you have to really empathize. Empathy is number one in education, and I think a lot of people are struggling with that.
So I'm gonna ask a question like that. A lot of students are wondering. I think you can guess it. Mm-hmm. What's your stance on homework?
Homework? That's an interesting one. I tend to stay away from homework because there's so much going on outside in the world, right? Like non-pandemic times, most students who are involved in something else, if you take that away and just pound homework on them, they don't have a chance to explore, right? I know some students who really want to elevate their game academically, but then they won't go out for a sport, or they won't go into a club because they may have to go see a tutor, or they may have to go and they have to do more and more homework. I'm the guy that I like to use class time as much as possible. I like to work with students while they're with me so I can be that mentor, be that accountability coach. And if they want to go along, there are some certain instances where we're working on a project or we're in an entrepreneurship course where they have to go outside and speak with a professional or kind of try to sell their product or service and these types of things. But my hope is this is something that they're very interested in, so it doesn't feel like homework. My 6 o'clock to 10 p.m., which we just did on Hall Pass, we'll talk about that in a minute, is like, what do you do between 6 and 10 p.m., right? Do you work on something that you're passionate about? Do you spend time with your family? And there's no wrong answer here, but I think, there's more learning that can happen outside of school on your own. It's just if you don't have a mentor or an accountability partner, it's very hard to do that, right? Because you don't really realize that. So it's a mindset too.
So yeah, the Hall Pass you just talked about. So can you tell me more about Hall Pass?
Absolutely. Super excited. Myself, Audrey Boyle, and Dr. Peter A. James, we launched this company in January. And it's a think tank. It's almost like a school. We're building a school. We're doing some online courses. And basically what we're doing is we're helping people in a gap year program. We're helping people in a transition program. We're helping business coach people. It's very interesting. We called it Hall Pass because, when you're in school and you get a Hall Pass and it doesn't have a time on it, right? What are you feeling? You're like, I can run around and I can take a look at things. I can, maybe even pop into lunch or whatever I want to do, right? And then just roam around and see what's out there. That's exactly where a lot of people are in life. They're roaming around. They don't really understand what the doors of opportunities are. So what we want to do is we want to help people identify those doors. We don't have any skin in the game. We're going to be the accountability partners for people. The best part about this is Audrey Boyle she's like the queen of marketing. She worked as a vice president for Home Depot. She has been a college professor, still is, downtown at Forbes. And she does her own comedy. So she's a marketing queen. Dr. Peter A. James is the mindset guru. He's an entrepreneur. He's also the entrepreneurship teacher at College of DuPage in DuPage County here in Illinois. And he is all about understanding and changing your mindset to be the best that you can be in any situation. And I'm the education person. I'm like, where do you find learning? How do you learn? So all three of us come together and are really three partners for whoever we're going to work with and trying to show them different lenses and different areas that they might not have looked at because a lot of people are focused on one path. So that's the Hall Pass. We want to give a lot of people Hall Passes. Give them that little smile that you just gave me, like, I'm in the hallway, right? That's exactly what we're looking for.
What advice do you have for new teachers?
Man, that's a tough one. Where are they teaching? Are they in a micro school? Are they homeschooling? Are they in a college?
Like teachers in like high school.
High school? Yeah. Okay, fair enough.
Or middle school. Yeah, high school, middle school.
Yeah. Number one, bring your lens. Most new teachers are young, right? I got into the game when I was 29, so I was a little bit later in life. I would suggest before they even become teachers, though, to get a little experience outside of education, because most of our students are not going to go into education. But a lot of teachers that I've seen they've gone to straight from high school to college, right back into high school. And I think sometimes we get a skewed lens. We don't really understand what's going on in the real world. I don't want to call it the real world, but the job world and the markets and different things like that. However, starting a new gig is extremely tiring. It's overwhelming. I remember my first year, even at 29, with some experience in the sales world and all across, basically, in Florida and Michigan, I worked in a lot of different areas. It's nerve-wracking. The number one thing I let people know who are coming into the game is to really understand their students. Be humble, fail in front of them, and just be open. Because when you're open in front of students, they know you don't have anything to hide. They know that you're real, and then they're gonna. It's like a relationship, right? Like you're building this bond, this relationship to actually move people forward. And by the way, as a teacher, I get to learn too. There's a reason I'm on all these different, Instagram and all these different platforms. It's not because I found them in the air. It's because students have taught me this. So being a young teacher coming in, it's very important to bring your lens, to bring who you are, because there are 4 generations in high school. If you think about it, there are 4 generations of teachers in that school building. And it's very important for each generation to bring what they've learned and what they've experienced in life to that community, because otherwise we're just going to stick in one generation, and we have to evolve. We have to be better. So there's a couple of things I would tell a new teacher.
Well, yeah, a new teacher for high school. What would you tell like a teacher for elementary school or younger?
Yeah, right. So my wife's an elementary school reading specialist. It is super hard right now. When you are teaching youth that young online, man, I can't even imagine it. It's very difficult. I think anybody who's passionate enough about it, that when you start something, it's extremely difficult to do. And now you have this other layer of toughness on here when you have to try to figure out IT stuff and all this stuff. So stick with it. I think this generation of teachers is going to be, if they're coming into the game right now, I think they're going to be the strongest ever, because they come into this not really knowing what it's like in a classroom, and they've already figured out that they're their own IT people and all this. And there's so many different layers on this. So if they can make it through, if they can stick through this pandemic and this challenges that we have in front of us, they're going to be the bomb. They're going to be awesome. So
we'll be right back.
This podcast was produced at CrossFunction's Boulevard Studio inside the historic Boulevard Arcade in downtown Oak Park. All-inclusive, healthy design, flexible terms. CrossFunction's private offices, meeting space, and state-of-the-art recording and production studio make it the flexible workspace destination in Chicago's Beltway. Call 708-948-7188 or visit crossfunction.com and book your tour today.
And we're back. So getting into the more political side of education, what are the politics of being an educator?
There's so many different levels to that. That's a big question. We could probably do a series on this. Well, first and foremost, I think as an educational leader, so I've had a role in administrative areas, and I've had roles in teaching, not too high in administration. So I was a department chair, and there it gets a little bit more political, right? You work for a school board that is voted in by a community. So on the local parts, it's very difficult. Like in Oak Park, you have a very diverse population, very educated, opinionated, which is a good thing, but it's very hard to navigate that. You have so many different lenses coming in on school districts that it can be polarizing, it can cease up decisions, and you have to be an extremely strong leader. I think that it is important when you come into an education sense, if you are going to be an education leader, you should probably have a vision and or a mission or a brand of who you are and hold to that. I think that gives you a good consistency of a school. Some people actually get a position to get a position and then start to, I growing and learning as a person, as a teacher, as an administrator is important, but I think you have to have a vision to do that. It's an extremely difficult job. I would not want to be a superintendent in the middle of this pandemic. You have to make decisions that nobody's happy with. So in that case, that's the political side of it.
Yeah, I mean, with our superintendent, every decision you make, you can't make everyone happy.
Exactly.
And sometimes you're not going to make even the majority happy.
Right. Yeah. And you're a trained professional, right? You have to try to figure out what is the best way to get the most people through education. But it's becoming harder and harder because in the world we live in, right, Cyrus, there's different areas that we can teach people. There's different avenues. And if we don't open up all those avenues and try to figure out what's best for that particular student, I think that we're not doing the greatest job in the world. And I think that's something that we can improve in education. The political side, boy, this year, right? It's every election year. It's interesting. As an educator, I'll just tell you my philosophy as a teacher when I stand in a classroom. My philosophy to teachers is to question everything, right? And have the students try to form their own opinions. I'm not there to tell them which candidate or what's right or wrong. That's not my place. I can do that on my own. I can do that, having a beer with a couple other teachers or whatever. But I think it's very important that we teach our students to look at everything at every angle and actually to have meaningful conversation. And I don't think we've done a really good job with that either. I think in the current situation that we're in, when we're extremely polarized, right? I mean, it's the elephant in the room. And I kind of lend that into possibly some faults of education. We haven't really taught people how to have conversations without throwing a fist or, yelling or raising voices or violence or what have you. When we start to understand people and understand who they are and empathize first, I mean, we can agree to disagree. I don't think there's a problem with that, but I think that we maybe have dropped the ball a little bit on teaching people that. And I don't just mean youth. I mean, it's ingrained. There's isms everywhere, and I don't want to deny that. And I just think that we can do a better job of really formulating people to be who they are and be okay with that, and then to be accepting and to understand people's views, not necessarily have to agree with them. So that's where that rolls. Again, we could do a whole series on it, but that's a great question.
What differences have you seen with the Obama administration with education compared to the Trump administration with education?
Mm-hmm. Man, I don't, honestly, the way I teach and the students coming in, outside of conversation and a little bit of bickering, there hasn't been that much change within a school. There might be belief changes. It's history. And when history is happening, good and bad, no matter what your angle or your lens is on it, I think there's learning in that. So I embrace that. I really do. Would I like things to be better? Always. And it doesn't matter if it's 2008 or 2016 or 2022, 2000, whenever. I think we all have something to learn from it. Every time a president comes in, there's a reaction. And then there's a response. Sometimes not in that order. Hopefully it's in that order where people just respond. There's always mood changes. There's always different things going on. There's ups and downs. And I think understanding where students are first actually helps that transition. They're witnessing history. And I don't think I've seen too many differences across the board. I honestly, I haven't really noticed much. I mean, people talk a lot in politics, right? Mm-hmm. We're going to do this or we're going to do that. It's interesting. School choice is always something out there. There's different things going on right now in education. I think the biggest thing, and I don't know if this is political, but when you have college costs rising just astronomically, and then you see these startups coming out, that's very exciting. I mean, Google just announced their little piece of education. Lambda School, Crash.co is a great place where people are starting to put their value up rather than their credentials. That's the change I see. But I don't know if that's political. I think that's just economical. I think that's people taking a look at it. I haven't paid attention too much. Are there laws that are being changed to aid this? I don't know.
Well, what I see with college costs is that it's really about debt collectors is a big problem. I mean, they're paid to kind of not really help much so that the interest rates rise and people have to pay more and the company makes more money. But I think that's a problem with our education system in general, is because it became the biggest bank in the world.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's just...
Right. Yeah. And I can expand on that a little. That's a great point. I mean, I teach personal finance or financial literacy, however you play it out or however the school announces it. And that's the number one thing we try now. That's a change that I've seen in that class, is trying to get students to understand what is the real cost of education. There's a lot of businesses out there where they're struggling to keep somebody for more than 3 years coming out of college. And the reason is And this is my hypothetical, but a lot of it is if somebody offers you another couple $1,000s, you're going to jump ship no matter what. I mean, it could be a worse culture. It could be not the best place for you to work, but you're going to jump ship because you're going to feel like you have a couple more bucks to pay off this ginormous college loan. You know, the market is straightening itself out. I mean, you do, like I said, Lambda and Discover Praxis and these schools, Holberton that are building on these different things that are happening. That's what's interesting. That's exciting to me, that change. College will always be there. College is good for a lot of things. It's not good for some other things. So I don't know where politics come in on that, to be honest. I think there is some, things that they could do better around loans. I think they could do some different things where they protect people a little bit more, but I'm not to say I like the market, I'll be honest.
What do you have to say about Biden's stance on forgiving student loan debt? Or you know about that, I assume.
I do. That's a tough one because I can see both sides of it. I'm going to play Switzerland here. I can see the fact that if they did that, maybe workers wouldn't jump more. They wouldn't have that worry anymore. But then again, who's going to pay for it, right? So on the other end is who does pay for this? How does this happen? I'm more of the wipe out the interest altogether or just lower the rate somehow. I don't know. I was privileged enough not to have a college loan, and I'm thankful I didn't because I didn't go right into what I was basically trained for. But I also see, there are people who did do it. What do you do then with the person who basically gave up a lot of things for their kids, or maybe the kid actually worked and then they created their own wealth to pay it off? But life isn't fair. So I really don't have the answer to that. I mean, I can see both sides of it. So it's a good question.
What inequities do you see with race and education?
That's a great question. I think I see large inequities. At Oak Park, when I was there, and he's still a great friend of mine, is Devon Alexander. And I'll give him a shout out here because he's an amazing equity trainer. I learned more from that guy on the golf course, just having conversations with him about race than going through any scripted piece.
Like racial training?
Racial training, yeah. Everybody's at different levels, I will tell you. And I have seen things in schools where belief systems are way off, where students are robbed of education. And it's heartbreaking. That's why I want to know students first. And so I think we have a long way to go. I think that people really need to understand and listen to different communities and people who don't look like you or I, right? I mean, the system was built by white males. I mean, let's be honest. So I think that when you want to change a system, a lot of people talk change. But when somebody else has an idea that's outside of yours and makes you a little bit uncomfortable, that's where the rubber meets the road. And when change starts to happen, people get uncomfortable. And there's either fight or flight, right? There are people who are going to dig in their heels and actually do what Oak Park did in, the 50s and 60s. I don't know exactly when it happened, but hey, we're going to try to make this work. And I would like to see more of that in education. I would like to see more different angles coming in, different lenses coming in on education. I think those are the biggest challenges that we have. I've been in rooms where people are talking about equity, and I've been in rooms where many people who aren't like me are saying, are you all ready for this? Because when we go to the first step, we can't balk. And unfortunately, that's happened a lot. But I see there are some places that it is working. I think there's a lot of different things out there that are working great. I think that, Dr. Shayla Holland, who's a principal at Lake Forest High School, has brought a lot of lenses as a leader who's a Black woman, who's a principal who came out of Philly, who went to Northwestern and went into a predominantly white school and faced a lot. But her story resonates, and she's an amazing educator. So I think more people like her, like Mr. Alexander coming in, are going to help. So I think there's more talk about it, which is good. I'm just not a patient person. So I'd like to see more action.
with like towns like that they grew up in with like a lot of educational problems and not a lot of opportunities in neighborhoods like that.
Hmm.
As it comes to Oak Park, well, like since you haven't been there 3 years, but what have you
Hmm.
seen in your time while you were there?
Wow, it's kind of cool. I was lucky enough to be part of an awesome business team, right? So our business education team is fantastic and still are. I'm going to give a shout out to Matt Preble, who is leading it now. You know, when we created it and we rebranded it, we changed it to the OPRF School of Business. And we kind of gave it the collegiate look, but we wanted to give everybody an opportunity to, if you're not going to college or if you're just, going to take a gap year or whatever, we wanted to give it that look. But leading the way, you have to kind of identify with the traditional piece. What's great is this is a little bit off topic, but I just noticed my son goes to Riverside Brookfield and they just named theirs the Riverside RB School of Business. So that's kind of cool. I feel like Oak Park has led that, When we called it the School of Business, I kind of call myself the founder of it, but it was the entire team. I mean, Derek Purvis and Nancy Bardo and Doug Belpedio at the time were people who we built this thing out, Rob Potts and Brian Davis, rest in peace, Brian. He just passed away, unfortunately. But I've seen growth. I mean, we brought in the incubator program. The community is working with the kids in the school, and that's what I would love to see. We've always had a very strong arts, a very strong music at Oak Park and River Forest High School. The poetry slams and Peter, he just put out a new book, I think, that was just in the paper. But there's always this undertone of growth in trying to do different things at Oak Park. And I think it's done as well, especially in the electives. So I've seen growth there, and I'm excited to see where it goes. I know I'm not a part of this community anymore in that sense, but I feel like I'm like the weird uncle that always hangs out and comes over here still, because I think this community it's got a lot of challenges, but when you're changing and you're moving forward, there's always challenges. So I've seen a lot of growth with the high school. It's got its challenges. I'm an impatient person. I like to be agile and move fast. And unfortunately, sometimes education is more like a big iceberg that's just kind of floating around and doesn't really move that much.
What are some basic principles of education that should always be there?
Right. I always go back to my philosophy of education is helping others show their value. And I think that the best way, those principles of understanding student first, right? Teach students before you teach subjects. I think that's something that is a must. And we are very much learning that right now the hard way. I also think flexibility is big in education. When you tell a student, I'm not here to grade you to get you, I'm here to grade you to improve you, that statement, I've used that in my last 3 or 4 years, starting out with classes, has changed the way that students actually come in. I'll tell a student, you're not going to get anything less than a C in the class. And they stop and they look at you, what? And they have to think about it, because then it takes the pressure of grading off of it.
Yeah.
I don't really like grades. I like portfolios. I think everybody should build a portfolio. I think everybody should walk out of high school. Yes, you can have the piece of paper diploma, but what if you had a brand of who you are? What are your values? What can you do? That's what I believe that should be in education. It's coming. I mean, it's there. A lot of schools that I've worked at have come up with 5 or 6 things that students should walk away from with. But how do we get students to show it? I think we need to embrace not necessarily social media, but we need to embrace technology to help students show that value. You don't have to have a podcast like you. You don't have to have a YouTube channel. You don't have to have an Instagram like all over the place. But you have to have a place where you can tell your story and show what you've done. And if we do that in high school, I think we're going to have an extremely strong generation coming out. And the last thing is, I think community should be intertwined with school more. I think that is something where communities can improve by their own youth in those communities. I can go to any community in the world and try to tell them my lens, but that's not going to make any sense to everybody, right? I grew up in a small white town in Indiana with 2,000 people. If I come into Oak Park and say, well, this is what you need to do because this is what we did in my hometown of Walkerton, it's not going to make sense, right? You need the people who have experienced it, who live in it. And then as educators or people who are accountability partners is, what do you want to see changed? And then how can we learn to change that? That's where the real education comes in.
All right. Thank you so much for being on my podcast.
Hey, it's a pleasure, man. And I appreciate it. I'm humbled to be here. And thank you so much, man.
All right.
This podcast was produced at CrossFunction's Boulevard Studio inside the historic Boulevard Arcade in downtown Oak Park. All-inclusive, healthy design, flexible terms. CrossFunction's private offices, meeting space, and state-of-the-art recording and production studio make it the flexible workspace destination in Chicago's Beltway. Call 708-948-7188 or visit crossfunction.com and book your tour today.